Well, Taylor introduced me. My name's Angeline Barrett, and I've been in the horticulture business for quite a while. And then when I retired, I became a master gardener, and I've really enjoyed doing that because we get a chance to help people with their gardening problems, and it's almost like what a mystery story. Somebody gives you a problem and then you try to figure out what the answer is. And so that's been an interesting part of it for me. And so I'm going to talk about Xeriscape and how to think about Xeriscape. And I have a slideshow. I want to apologize for my missing teeth. This happened. My sister knocked my teeth loose when we were younger. In fact, I told her about it. I sent her a picture for Easter and she said, "What happened to your teeth?" And I said, "Well, maybe you don't remember, but when we were little, we were running through the sprinkler. We hit head on. Her head hit my teeth." But it's been kind of an issue for me. And so now I'm getting implants. And if you don't have them, they take quite a while I have 2 more months of toothlessness.
Oh.
So anyway, I'm just, it's not on purpose. I looked around for my Halloween vampire teeth, but I couldn't find them. So anyway. So I guess I'll start. And one thing I want to invite you at any time to just if you have a question to ask or would like me to repeat something or explain it better, just use your chat button. And let me see, I want to make sure, yeah, there it is, so that I can, when I want to, I'll be able to see you, I think, and then you unmute yourself, which is the little box in the lower left-hand corner, and then ask your question, and I will try to answer it. So, well, I'll get started, and I'm going to share my screen now. And let's see, I want to share. So this is it. We're calling it water-wise landscaping, and we all know. I'm assuming we all know that we are in an extreme to exceptional drought in this state, but especially the western part. You're in Montrose and you're a little higher elevation, but I'm sure you're experiencing it. So many trees and shrubs and plants that even my perennials didn't all make it through the winter because it was so dry and warm. And so this water-wise landscaping, I think, will be an important way to do things in the future. And so it's a good thing to learn about it. Well, let me see. It's not coming across. No, I want to. So Taylor, you'll be my technical advisor. There it goes. I don't know what happened, but so how many of you want your garden to look like this? I do. But this is definitely a xeriscape. I'm not sure where this is, although many of the plants that are in this photo grow right here in Western Colorado. And so it's definitely a doable type of landscape here. And it takes a while to get it to be this beautiful. I'm working on mine, but it's definitely possible. So think this kind of a landscape rather than the rockscape that we see a lot of times that is called xeriscape. That's low water, but it's not as beautiful as this. So first thing we have to remember, is anyone here a newcomer to the Western Slope? All of you know that we live in a desert. And this is out looking over the Grand Valley from the monument, I think, from Colorado National Monument. And this is uh, I believe it's a Findler bush is what the name of it is. It's a little white blooming bush in the rose family that's very drought tolerant, but grows up in the monument. But you can see we're pretty dry. We don't have grass everywhere, at least the kind of grass when you think of your lawn. So we just have to keep that thought that we were not necessarily meant to have a landscape like they have in England or back east. Um, this is a map of our normal precipitation patterns. And as you can see, Grand Junction is just right on the edge. Um, it's saying that we get, well, Grand Mesa gets 30 to 35 inches. Grand Junction here really gets under 10 inches, and that's our normal rainfall. But if we don't get that 8 to 10 inches of rainfall, then the plants that normally grow here are stressed. And so that's just to show you what our normal rainfall is. But now we aren't even getting this much due to the drought. And then it's a good thing to have a definition of drought, because you feel like it's dry anyway here, but drought means that we haven't had rainfall for so long that for normal native plant growth, uh, which begins when the soil moisture is so diminished that vegetation roots can't absorb enough water to replace what they lose by transpiration. And transpiration, of course, is the process by which the plant breathes and functions, with the roots gathering the nutrients from the soils and then bringing them up to the leaves, and then, gives off CO2 or oxygen, excuse me, CO2 is the other way around, takes in CO2, but gives off oxygen and water. And so that's what causes everything to work. So if there's not enough water in the soil, it can't function properly. Plants can't function properly. Okay, so this is the drought monitor showing what it is now in Colorado. And see, we're shown, this is Grand Junction. Montrose is just a little farther south, of course, but we're in extreme drought, but we're almost to the point of exceptional drought. So many of our lakes are dry. My husband and I took a walk up on Grand Mesa this winter, or early in the winter, and of course there hadn't been any snow yet at that time, but so many of the lakes we passed were just completely dry, no water in them at all. And so that's been a problem. And we had a warm, dry winter, which is going to affect our trees. And so what happens to the plants when they can't function properly is that makes them way more vulnerable to disease and to insect damage, and they just become more fragile. And it says that every year since '88, our monthly moisture has gone down instead of up. And I remember gardening in the '80s, and it seemed okay. It seemed like we got the summer monsoons and the winter snow. We're not getting that anymore, at least right now. So and I thought I'd better find Xeriscape. Of course, you probably all heard the word xeroscaping, which is not what it is. So, and I was around when they invented the term Xeriscape, and it was created by Denver Water. They realized that they were not going to have enough water to keep on the way they had been going before, with people moving into the area from other places. And so they started looking to how they could conserve water. So they came up with this idea of landscaping, uh, which which would save water and not require so much water. So that, and Xeri, which is a Greek term, I think, means dry. So that's where the xeriscapes come from. And xeriscaping, I'm not sure. I think people just didn't realize that they were saying it wrong. But it turns out a lot of times they ended up saying it right, because what they did in the landscape was pretty zero. So xeriscape conserves water. And I'll explain how a little later. And honestly, it does create fewer weed problems because you're watering only where you need to water instead of the whole area, for instance. So you can use drip irrigation or just zone your plants according to water needs, that kind of thing. And so once you get that going, the weeds don't, they're kind of opportunists in the right situation. And so weeds don't always grow quite like they would. And now, did someone have a question? No, they didn't. Okay. The other thing that I like about Xeriscape is because we are a desert here in Western Colorado. It kind of gives what I've heard termed as a sense of place, so that we're not trying to imitate somewhere else. We're working with what we have here. You know, in Western Colorado, we have we have a beautiful desert, really. So so that it almost makes your landscape blend better with what's already here. So this is what Xeriscape can look like. This is a house here in the Grand Valley, I think, and it's got a lot of native plants in it, as well as introduced plants that are xeric. So this is a penstemon, of course, a yucca. This is another type of penstemon that's not in bloom yet. It's got the native cedar trees, or the junipers, the one seed juniper. This, I'm not sure, I think it's a mountain mahogany, which is a native plant. And this is a good old pinyon, which is our pine tree. So there's a lot of native, this is probably in the spring. And so this is a true local xeriscape. This is what they often look like as a xeriscape. And you can just, I mean, when you go back to that and then you go to this, there's quite a bit of difference in just the, I don't know, the comfortableness, the way that it looks. It just doesn't look like you would be happy sitting on that rock, for instance. It'd be hot in the summer, I'm sure, and perhaps colder even, and drier in the winter. So people usually talk about 7 principles, and I'll kind of go through, I'll read them up, and then I'll go through them individually throughout the slideshow. First, of course, is planning and design. And I think that's always a good way to start a landscape. I spent a lot of my adult career as a landscape designer. And I think that it really helps. Number one, you have a clearer idea in your mind as to what you want to do in your landscape. And then, if you have to phase it, you don't have to buy everything at once. It can save you money. Your irrigation can be planned according to what you want in your landscape, rather than trying to retrofit your plants to where the water is, for instance. So I think planning and design is really a good first number 1 step in planning a xeriscape. Then the second is select and zone plants for the water needs that the plant has. And so you can kind of find out do a little research on the plants that you want to have, to find out if they like lots of water, which in a xeriscape, there's room for plants that use more water than others, because they may be our favorite plants. And so you don't want to uh, you don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater is kind of what I'm trying to say. So um, you once you know what the water needs of the plant is, you can place it in the landscape where it will have kind of an optimum chance of being happy and surviving. So that's one thing to know. So it's good to do just a little research. Oftentimes, the only thing you have to do is read the little tag in the plant at the nursery or go online. There's all kinds of places online that will tell you about plants and show you pictures of them and everything. The third principle is efficient irrigation. And I think the first two come first. So many places think they need to get their irrigation in first thing. And as a construction project, it probably is better to do the installation of the irrigation before you start building things around it so that you don't have to redo it over, you know, uh, like you get your irrigation in and then you realize you want something different there, then you have to take that out, put it in. So that's why you plan and design so that you know where that irrigation is going to go and what's going to be watered by it. So then you can design the irrigation heads to suit whatever you're watering. So for instance, if you've got a big lawn, then pop-ups are good for a lawn. If it's a great big lawn, you can use those, what I call mini pods, which are a larger area is watered. But then if you have, let's say, a flower bed or a vegetable garden, you can choose the proper kind of watering for that. That may be a drip bubbler or a flood irrigation for, say, a raised bed box, something like that, so that you'll have the water where you really want it, is why the irrigation needs to be designed to go with the landscape. So that's what that's all about. And I think it costs you less money when you know exactly what you need in terms of water and where it should go. So number 4 is reduce turf to practical areas. And I designed for a while in Arizona where they have really worse water problems sometimes than we do. And that I would say to people, well, design it about the size of a volleyball court. Because that way you can play volleyball or the kids can kick the ball around or whatever, but you don't really have to have much more than that. I've kind of changed my tune because sometimes in my yard, for instance, I have a large patio. My husband and I entertain quite a bit. And so I use that lawn space as kind of like an extra outdoor room, so to speak, so that my guests can kind of spread out. We can sit out and put our chair and watch the view or whatever we want to do. So it's almost like a carpet or something where you're putting it where you will use it the most. Because I don't care what anyone says, human beings like that cool green look that lawn will give you. And that's just something to remember, so that put it where you can view it out your windows or something, but it doesn't have to be huge because that probably is what takes the most water in your yard, is that lawn. And the other thing about it is that once you learn how to irrigate it properly, you don't need to water it as often as a lot of people do, even though we are in a drought. The turf actually has kind of an optimal amount of water, and if you get too much, it'll get diseases and different things that and invite insects in to live there because it's got too much water. So just think of how you're going to use the lawn. It's not that there's a certain size, really. It's more, let's put the lawn where we're really going to enjoy it. And that's kind of how the best way to think about it is, I think. And then how many of you think you have wonderful soil? Anybody? Western Colorado is basically decomposed rock. There's not much else in it. And not much nitrogen, which plants love to grow. And the nitrogen actually kind of comes from themselves. So it's plants that have been there before that leaves the nitrogen in the soil. So it's important if you are starting from scratch, for instance, in a new home, to put compost in the soil where you're going to plant a lawn or where you're going to plant a vegetable garden, even needs more. But the nutrients for your plants will come from that decomposed plant life is basically what it is. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I've been working on our soil, and we've lived in our house now for 3 years, and it had pretty good soil, really. The people before us had done some work, but almost you can never have too much compost. Well, that's not true. You can, but I just add a little bit each year so that I'm kind of continuing to keep that soil healthy so that the nutrients are always coming and for the next crop of plants. Another thing that is really helpful in a xeriscape, number 6, is use mulch. As dry as we are, mulch on top of the soil will help retain the moisture in the soil. And it kind of, there are lots of mulches that you can use, including rock mulch. A lot of people do use that. In fact, it is just as good a mulch as the, say, wood chips or ground up, bark, or those kinds of things. They all do a good job of keeping the soil cooler and keeping the moisture in the soil. And then, of course, the last one, number 7, a lot of people forget about this one. There's no such thing as no maintenance in a garden. That's just basically it. And you see a lot of failed gardens where people did not maintain them properly. That probably would have looked pretty good had they, pruned it when it needed to be pruned, mulched the ground, and if it needed new mulch, replaced it, that kind of thing. Deadheaded the perennials and everything. Just there's a lot of little jobs that will make the garden so much happier. And I know there's a new thought these days about what they call a sustainable garden, which I'm kind of exploring in a radio show that I do. It's the second Wednesday of each month for half an hour, and we explored these things. They make a lot of claims for these sustainable gardens, saying that it's eventually less work, but I have my doubts about that. I hope it is. I'm going to try it one day. I'm working on that myself in my own garden. So I'll head on to the next slide. One thing when you're designing a xeriscape, think of the space as kind of public space where your front yard, people come to the front door. That would be maybe one kind of xeriscape, which this is. These are all just beautiful xeric plants. There's so many to choose from, really, and all these little things that have. There, I've kind of got my arrow pointing at it. I wish I had one of those little red dots. But the yucca, and this is verbena, which is a drought tolerant plant. This is a little juniper, probably a mugo pine. Even roses are tougher than nails, most of them. So they've just done a wonderful, inviting job to bring you into their home in this picture. Okay, so now we're going to talk about planning and design. I think it's the most important part of Xeriscape. It's almost more a thought process, so that your landscape turns out to be what you want where you live. You know, it's kind of like it's your own personal space that you want to live in, and that's what you're doing with this landscape design. So this is a little simple landscape design that I did for a friend. They had all grass in this yard, and so we changed it into a kind of a more of a desert-like scene. I don't have a photograph of it yet. I'm going to try to get one this spring. But we replaced the grass with a gravel mulch. This was a kind of a, we used a decomposed granite with some other larger kind of reddish rocks we spread it on the surface so that it kind of emulated desert soils. That's what what we wanted it to look like. And then each of these little symbols stands for a certain plant. And so we just they had a couple of trees already, the ones with the X's in them, but we ended up putting a lot of perennials and shrubs in with it. And so it's pretty. It's watered with a drip system, just little bubblers by the plant, each plant, and they have very much enjoyed it. So, and it is a little easier to take care of than mowing the lawn every week. So that's one thing you can think about it when you take out your lawn. So your landscape plan should kind of look like this when you're working on it, whether it's just a sketch. This one happens to be to scale. It's better if you can get it to scale, because then you know the actual sizes of the plants that you're dealing with. And I usually draw my plants at, say, their 15-year growth patterns, so that these trees, you'll know how big the shade pattern is going to be in the future. So that's a good way to do it. And then it doesn't get so crowded so fast. And you have to kind of walk a careful line between putting the plants too close together or too far apart so that it looks like there's a plant here and a plant there. But you know, you have to kind of work that out. So that's why I say, okay, 15 years down the road, what is this going to look like? So a lot of people ask me, why should I design? Can I just kind of do it? And I think you can. You know, you can just put things in and they'll turn out fine. But the thing that once you draw it down or have it in your mind, you are covering all these issues at once. You know, the aesthetics is very important. You want it to look beautiful, but you also want it to function. So you want it to go like, okay, when I take the trash out, you know, am I going to get from the kitchen to the trash can or the compost pile or whatever it is? How do you know, how can you make it so that it's easy to water it? Because sometimes we need water. My own personal landscape is not automated, and so we have to go out there and turn on the valves, and I'm watering by hand my flowers, and it would be a lot more functional if I had an automatic system. And so I'm working on that, and it would be more efficient in terms of maintenance as well. One thing that I found about design is that you save money when it's designed. And that's because you're not learning the hard way, like making mistakes. You've done a little research, and so you are more sure about, okay, am I putting this plant in the right place? Am I doing this? And one of the things that I'm doing in my own yard, I've had it for 3 years now, they actually had a wonderful garden, except that the plants weren't necessarily placed according to how much sun or shade they would like. So I spent my first year moving things to where they would be happier. So um, it's taken them a little time to come back, but they are coming back now, and I think they'll be happier in the long run. They probably hated me for that one summer, but they'll like me more for later. So um, you don't have to learn by spending by spending money that you should have been able to not have to waste. I guess that's that way. And then here comes back to that sense of place. So I think it has to do with, this is my home. This is where I want to live outside, whatever you like to do outside. And this is how I'm going to blend in with my native landscape. And in our yard, we live right above the canal, where a lot of animals go past. My husband has a hobby of motion sensor cameras, and we get all kinds of animals in our camera. And so we've left that wild. And I'm actually going to plant some more natives so that they'll eat that first before they eat my garden. That's the theory. So here is a wonderful example of a landscape. Apparently these people must be artists, because they've just done everything with so much care and beauty, So it was designed for them. They have these little ornaments that they like. They have the wind chimes, and apparently they like cactus, because there's a lot of cactus. But this is actually a xeriscape that that just blends with their outdoor space. And they got a lot of unusual plants. This plant, and this happens to be a landscape over in Denver, but it showed how they did such a good job with a kind of a sloped yard. Around here, I think the tendency is, well, if it's not flat, make it flat, but they use the slope to place their plants. Is just beautiful. And they've got some unusual things. This is actually, I believe it's called a yucca rostrata, rostrata, and it's like a Joshua tree. I don't know if any of you know what a Joshua tree is, but it's basically a big yucca on a stick. It's a tree yucca. So it's very unusual, and probably more unusual for Denver than it is for us. So start your design. The first thing you're going to do is make a site analysis. So what I used to do when I was designing landscape is that I would make a map of the property, and you have to do a little measuring, especially if you want it to scale, because which is the best way to do it, if you can. So you'll measure things according to where, I usually started with the walls of the house and where the windows of the house were, because you want to be able to look out your window and see a nice view, what your natural features are, if you do have a slope in your yard, or are there trees that need to be accounted for already existing? Are there any man-made structures? Those kinds of things are what you're going to put on your map. And one of the easiest ways to do that is, I don't know if Montrose has this, but I expect it does. They've made these beautiful aerial photographs of all the properties in the city limits. And so you can actually go online and print out one of these to scale, and and I usually just trace over top of that map to get my map that I'm drawing for my yard. I'll show you a little bit later. So that's an easy way to do that. One of the other things that you really want to pay attention to, and I know so many people who don't, is your relationship to the sun. And that's, where is that sun at different times of the day in relation to where your house is, how it's oriented, because that will create microclimates that you can plant different types of things in. You will be able to um, you know, place your vegetable garden where it's perhaps going to get the kind of light that it needs to grow vegetables. They like a little more sunlight than some things. You'll know where the shade is. For instance, if your house shades a certain part of the landscape, that'll be a deep shade area. You'll have to choose plants that go there, that can tolerate that kind of shade. And then just because you want to take advantage of the sun, um, you can plan. For instance, say if you've got a south-facing window, you may want to plant a tree there. It's the best kind of shade you can get. So much better than an awning or a shade structure of any kind, because it's got filtered shade, and the tree provides moisture. And so you can open up your windows and there's the tree. It smells wonderful. And so that's really important to know where that sunlight is going to be at different times of the day. And then lastly, you just make a list of the things that are good about your property, and then the things that might be a limitation to a landscape. For instance, if you had a rocky hillside, might be harder to grow some plants there. I know we have a place in our valley called the Ridges, and a lot of it is just bedrock. But people have done beautiful things because, especially if you're planting from seed, sometimes the seeds can get in the crevices between the rocks and grow anyway. So that's the kind of thing. And I just make a list of what you think might be a benefit and what might limit you. So I'm talking about my yard. This is my yard, and it's nothing special. The nice thing about it was that a lot of the beds had been planted, and I'm just kind of filling things out and switching. I'm trying to kill off some of the lawn because it's a huge lawn to mow. And it's got a lot of little nooks and crannies to mow around. And so I'm making one larger central mowable area, and the rest of it's going to be shrubs, trees, native grasses, and that's my plan. The former owner had a lot of yard art. I kept some of it, and I'm working on getting this one with the little cockeyed birdhouse. I'm getting that fixed. But so my yard is a work in progress. And by the way, outside the chain link fence is the wild area, and that's where the animals, it's a kind of a trail for them. So this is my map of my house and yard. And the one thing, let's see, this north arrow is how you kind of know how to orient your house to the sun. So our sun is coming in kind of on an angle towards our house, and we get nice morning sun, coming in from the east, and then I have a pretty hot west side of the house, and so it really makes a difference what I plan. And so I'm kind of listing things about where our patio is. We have a shed and a pump house and all these things I'm putting on the maps so that I'll know exactly where they are so that I can plan around them. And we do have a nice view. I've actually marked that so that I would know not to cover it up with a big tree or something. I want to, or you can have a tree nearby. But if you're going to be sitting down on the patio, for instance, you might want to have that tree close to the patio so that you can see the view out from underneath the tree. So those are the kinds of things that you're going to put on your map. Okay, now here's the picture of the aerial photograph, and I've superimposed my map on top of that. And so you can see where my trees actually are. because well, the aerial photograph was taken in the winter. So even though you see it as a tree here, um, it's all you're seeing is the branches. And this particular tree was the most beautiful, huge 30-year-old walnut tree that was almost killed last year in a late frost. And oh, broke my heart. So I had the tree trimmers come and get the dead wood out, but we'll see if it comes back this spring. It hasn't started to bud out yet. So I hope it does. So this is just what exists in my yard right now. And so you can accurately position your house and trees according to the aerial photograph on you. And you can see how steep that slope behind my house is. In fact, you can jump from about this level right into the canal. So if we ever want to go swimming, I guess we could. So it's kind of like a natural swimming pool back there. So, and it really isn't that hard. You can just download that onto your computer. I do have a drawing program, so you don't, but you can just use the map, print it out, go to maybe a copy or some place like that. And you can get a copy of that map, and then you can just use tracing paper to trace over top. So that's kind of the less technical way of doing it. Well, then here I am kind of fleshing out places where I want things. So this is kind of a sketch where I'm showing what is and then what I want to have in there. I've got little hatched areas where flowers are now. And so then I can use this. Let me go back. I can use this to kind of plan what I want to have in the garden. And I guess that's mostly what it's about. It's what I call a sketch map, showing the existing properties of your land. So then you need to think about how you use the land, how you're going to use your yard. We don't have children, we're older. And so mostly we use our yard to entertain and garden. I like to garden and just to sit out and enjoy the outdoors. So we do have we don't entertain large parties, just mostly friends, neighbors. But I did want to think about that in my landscape. So then you can start thinking about where you're going to plant things, what your irrigation zones will be, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I usually talk about style. My house was built in 1966, so it's what they call mid-century modern right now. And of course, I'm trying to change it back to antiques because that's what I like. But I am thinking of the styles I want to have, that will blend with my house. My house is brick, so I'll probably use brick somehow in the yard and in just common. And I like kind of whimsical things, so I'm putting that type of thing. I'm having someone make me a cow jumping over the moon, like the nursery rhyme, out of an old plate and a piece of metal that I have. And so mine will be kind of, I don't know, it'll just reflect my personality, I guess is how I should say it. And then last but not least, you need to think about the budget. Can you afford to pay for this all at once? Well, I can't. So I have to kind of phase it. So then you're starting to think, well, what's the most important thing to start with? And so that's how you kind of work on that, and like how you would phase it. I do try to assign an actual budget to it. And believe me, things are so expensive these days, you can hardly believe it. But you really need to have a realistic idea of what it's going to cost. Otherwise, you'll be very surprised, not in a pleasant way. The other thing I should go back. You want to think about how much energy you want to put into your yard. If you don't want to do anything much, just know that's where you really are coming from, so that you don't plant a garden that takes a lot of care. And this is especially true with flower gardens, because they actually take quite a bit of time. You can't have a beautiful flower garden for the most part and not take care of it. So that's just something to kind of include in your thought process. So this is just a kind of an example of a family who, they apparently had kids and they played in the yard. I've even designed a yard all the way around a dog. The dog liked to run along the fence and he was tromping all the plants. And so we had to figure out how to let the dog do what it wanted to do, because it was going to anyway, and not kill the flower garden. So there's all kinds of things that you can do in your garden. So then this is what I call a bubble diagram. So you start fleshing out where you're going to put things. So I had a nice sunny spot over here on this is the west side of the yard. And I thought that'd be a good place for a veggie garden. And I've tried it out the last couple of years and it does pretty well. The tomatoes, maybe. I don't know. Does anyone else have trouble with tomatoes? I do. But anyway, so then I've got the lawn, and we're kind of looking out of the house onto the lawn and trees. We've got a wildlife area identified where I'll be planting native plants. This area over here was a nice shady area. My husband likes to work outside sometimes there. And so his man shed is out here, and he's got this tree to shade it. So I've got that kind of plant, future deck perhaps, and things. And then I've got, this is kind of where this utility area is, where I've got all my gardening implements and wheelbarrow, that kind of thing, so that it's accessible to the rest of the yard. So that's a good thing. And you can just sketch that out on a piece of tracing paper, wad it up if you don't like it. Don't put a whole lot of time into it, but it'll give you a general idea of where you're going with that design. So, and then I wanted to talk about a sense of place. This is another desert landscape. It is here in Grand Junction. They provided shade for themselves, which they didn't have much of. And most of these are desert plants. You can tell the grass is the yucca, but it blends in with the surrounding landscape, but it doesn't come across as dry and deserty exactly. It comes across more as an oasis in the desert where people can enjoy themselves outdoors. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say a sense of place. This is the opposite of a sense of place. One of my friends found this picture and I had to, it actually occurs in Las Vegas or nearby in Las Vegas. They've got the total desert all around them. And here's this lush, I guess it's a golf course, I don't know. But it's like, I put in my notes here, it's like Scotland was dropped on the desert. Anyway, so that's kind of what we don't want. Anyway, so now we're going to talk about plants, which is really, kind of probably why most of you are here, is to talk about what kind of plants to put in. So you're going to choose your plants by what you like to live with, basically. And hopefully you'll choose xeric plants, because for almost every plant that you can think of, there's a xeric plant that would give you that same feeling and that same look, same color, maybe all kinds of things that you can have a xeric plant where, let's say you love azaleas, which do not grow here very well at all. They want an acid soil. So say you like those a whole lot and you'd love to have something that would fit that niche. Well, there's all kinds of plants that give that look of a kind of a lush plant with a pink flower. Start with roses. Hibiscus is another one. All of those things are more drought tolerant and alkaline soil accepting than an azalea. So you can kind of say, well, this is my favorite plant, but I would do just as well with this more xeric one. So then what you need to think about is, after you've kind of decided what you would really like to see in your garden, you want to zone those plants by their water needs. And so the plants that use the most water should probably be closest to your living space. So if you have a patio outdoors, or you just want to look out the window at your favorite plants, they should be close where you can see them and enjoy them and take care of them, because they may be the ones that need the most care. So that while you're sitting out on the patio having a glass of iced tea or something, you see that, oh, this one needs deadheading, or I should give that some water, so that you're all those higher maintenance and higher water needs plants are close to where you live. So then you can kind of move outward, and I'll show you real clearly in a couple slides later. You want to make sure that it has the right exposure. And in our climate and altitude, most of the plants that you buy at most nurseries, except at local nurseries especially, are grown somewhere else. They're grown in the East or on the West Coast. I owned a garden center for many years, and they will grade the plant according to whether it wants sun, part sun, or shade. Well, our sun is much more intense than the sunlight that they get either in the East or on the coast, because of our altitude and our dry climate. So when it says sun, you are going to have to assume that it might need part sun, because it might need a little shade in the afternoon, is what I'm trying to say. So some of the plants that are labeled full sun in the garden centers are actually, in our climate, might prefer a little afternoon shade. So think about that when you're finding out your exposure. Another one that's kind of tricky is dry shade. Most things whose natural ecosystem involves shade grow in a forest, where there's a lot more humus in the soil, more moisture, and so that they may need especially improved soil to be happy in the shade here in Western Colorado. So you might want to give a little bit more compost to that area, because they're native where they were first, where they came from might have been a forest. And they may want a little bit more acidic soil than we have. We have quite alkaline soil. This one is pretty obvious. Choose plants appropriate to our climate and soils. But a lot of the things you find in the garden centers, especially the big boxers like Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's, are not necessarily going to do well in our climate at all. They really would like to be in an area that has more acid soil and less, more moisture in the air. For instance, if you're on the coast, you've got lots of moisture in the air most of the time. Our humidity level is pretty low. So you have to kind of think about that. I actually have a little weeping spruce that was here, and I love it. But in the summertime, I have to spray it because it just needs more moisture around it. Otherwise, it starts turning brown. Even though I'm watering the roots, it wants that moisture on its needles. So, and the famous words, right plant, right place, that's where your research comes in. You look these things up, online, and you just make sure that that plant gets put in a place where it's going to have a good chance of survival, and it'll thrive. And then, I mentioned it before, but you want to make sure that the things that require the most maintenance are probably closer to your house. And except maybe the vegetable garden, because when you go to the vegetable garden, you've got your vegetable garden clothes on and you've got your tools with you. You'll be spending some time out there. But otherwise, you want to be there where, oh, I can do something to that plant. And this is a good way to think about it. Zone 1 is close to the house. It's the high maintenance zone, higher water. Zone 2 is what kind of a transition zone. And you'd have more water wise plants there, and you'd water that less frequently. So you may be designing your irrigation system to come on less times a week or whatever, less times a month, maybe even. And it's a little easier to maintain. And then when you get to zone 3, this is kind of your xeric zone. You're maybe dealing mostly with native plants, things that would survive here, might enjoy a little extra water, but don't have to have it to live. So, and it's kind of, you may not even have irrigation out there, or just periodic irrigation by a hose or something, but that would be a zone. And of course, most people are just living in a yard, so it's just a good way to think about this. If you have a larger property, this is almost necessary to think of it this way, to have these zones close to the house and then farther away for less water and less maintenance. And this is an example of the right plant, right place. I'm not sure. I think this may have been taken at the Denver Botanic Gardens, which is so beautiful. If you haven't been there to see it, it's just world class, really. So they have planted this for similar water needs. This is a Mexican evening primrose. This is probably something called Zauschneria, or it could be a Gostichi, or a penstemon. All these are low water plants. Blue flax. This is something, I used to call it sotol in Arizona, but it's a kind of a cross between a yucca and a grass almost, if you were describing it. So all of these things are low water. And so that's kind of what they're talking about, low water. And they all have similar water needs. So I like to have a color scheme in my garden. Not I have one color scheme in the backyard and another one in the front, but these are just some things you can do. And I wanted to talk about color a little bit, because when you're planning color in your garden, it's just, you just need to know the color wheel, the primaries, then the complementaries, and the analogous, which are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So this is kind of an analogous color. So it's purples and pinks, and they're similar in color. Now, if you chose something here with the chartreuse green and the deep purple, those are two other colors. But I think if you can decide on a color scheme, it gives the garden a definition. And you can do it all with shrubbery if you want to. This is a fall color of, I'm not sure, I think it's a viburnum is what that is. But you're planning that for that fall color. And so then you might want to plant it with grasses or something that contrasts with it, or, so those are the things that you're thinking about when you're doing your color schemes. And you have to think of it by season, especially if you're using perennials, because they have a time to bloom. And so you have to use several different kinds of perennials to get all season long color. And that's just something to include in your thoughts. Um, I wanted to mention plant select plants. When you're looking for good plants that grow well in Colorado, and they'll say sometimes especially well in the western part or the eastern part, you can look for this plant select. There's a symbol for it, but they are chosen by Colorado State University and Denver Botanic Gardens for their appropriateness to our climate. And oftentimes they've been chosen because they have a long blooming season and they're not going to be invasive in your garden. I planted some grass one time that was kind of an ornamental grass, and it took over the yard to where I had to just dig it all out. So you want to know, if it's invasive. So these plant select plants have been chosen for all these good reasons to that they know that they will make it through our up and down winters, and it is just a good way to select plants. These are some examples of them. Let me see. This, I took a picture. This is a butterfly bush, but it's a spring blooming one instead of a summer blooming one. And this is what it looks like in the spring. And it's just, I remember driving past this thing and I slammed on the brakes. It's a good thing there was nobody behind me, but it was so beautiful. I had to get out and take a picture of it. So that's one of them. This is Agassiz rupestris, which is a native plant down in New Mexico, I think. And this is the plant select symbol right here in the corner there. So when you see that, you'll know it's a plant select. I love this plant. I am having a little trouble getting it to winter over. And so you may have some problem with it in the in Montrose because you're higher elevation. It's a zone 5, I think, and you may be a zone 5, but which is a climate zone. If you didn't realize that, we are now a zone 7. We used to be a zone 5, and so I'm assuming you for sure are zone 5, but it's just something you'll have to ask your master gardeners or your extension service what zone you're in up there. But and this particular one, I tried it out. This is Grand Mesa. This is a pin stem, and it's native to Grand Mesa, and it is this outrageous electric blue. It's just beautiful. And I got one. It had a hard time this winter because it was so dry, but it's coming back. So these are just some examples of some of the plant select. So you kind of almost know you can't go wrong with them. So. Okay, and then I want to talk just briefly about native plants. These are all native plants in these pictures. They were taken, I think the upper one was taken in Denver Botanic Gardens, and they have one of the most beautiful native western slope gardens over there on the eastern slope that I've ever seen. So, and I'm not sure where I think this was taken in Grand Junction. This is just a good old, let's see, that is a juniper. This, I believe, is a rabbit brush. And a lot of these people don't know it, but rabbit brush is a plant that, well, in nature, it is browsed by animals. And so it takes well to being sheared. So you can go in the spring and just shear that back into a little ball, and it won't get so ungainly and raggedy looking. So there's a lot of things that you learn when you're doing these native plants. I think this one here may be a currant. And there's a new currant that High Country Gardens is selling that has pink flowers instead of yellow flowers. It's really pretty. They're touting it. And these are native grasses. I'm not sure which one. This may be a wheatgrass down here. But native plants have their place. I don't know, in a city landscape, sometimes they are too raggedy to fit in the neighborhood, but I sneak them in here and there. and they definitely know how to live in our climate. Okay, let's talk about irrigation. So I've been, I'm almost, we've been here an hour. I'm talking longer than I should have. So I already mentioned to design the landscape, and then you can design your irrigation to fit your landscape. You want to kind of audit things. So many people will put in an irrigation system, but they don't really know if it's functioning each year. So you really need to, especially in the beginning of the year, make sure all your heads are going and repair the ones that don't. And that's part of the maintenance of keeping a garden in this area. I don't like doing it myself much, so I make my husband do it. He doesn't mind it so bad, but that's something that you just kind of need to do when you are having an irrigation in this climate. Let's see. This is my idea of efficient irrigation is, he's got the perfect idea of how to irrigate. Anyway, just threw that in there. So then you're limiting the turf areas. I think I was trying to explain it before, how you use the lawn. So you're giving the turf a purpose. You're not just doing it, even if it's just an aesthetic purpose to make you feel like you live in Scotland. I don't know. It just, why it's there. You're not just mowing it, fertilizing it, watering it all the time just because. So I like to make the areas practical, easy to use, and water and mow. And I think it's good to plant small, accessible areas near the house. See, this is a kind of how a small lawn can make your yard feel just that lush green, comfortable way you want it to feel. And so it doesn't even really have to be that big. And most of the green in this yard comes from the shrubs and things. So, and this is probably fairly easy to take care of. So you don't have to have a big tractor or anything to mow it. You just, you can do it on a Saturday, or like my husband, every other Saturday or every third Saturday. So, it's not so big that you can't handle it. And then you don't even have to have a lawn to have things look lush. I love this landscape. It's up kind of up in the hills, the foothills, just below the monument. And it looks lush. You're mostly spending your time on the patio, but you have something pretty to look at and colorful. This one is a little bit more designed, I guess you call it, but it still comes across as a comfortable place. In fact, one of my master gardener friends just loves this kind of square modern look because that's what she really likes. That's kind of her style, let's put it. So that's just different ways that you can get by without a lawn and still have a wonderful landscape. Then you can also, this is what I'm going to try in my yard, is use a drought tolerant native grass. This is blue grama grass, which will grow really well up in Montrose. I'm sure better than down here in Grand Junction. And it's a mow by choice grass. So you can let it grow like this, which is a little longer than a lawn, or you can mow it. It'll be all right with both. And I don't know if I have a picture. Let me see what my next one is. No, I'm going to go back. You can buy the seed or plugs from High Country Gardens, or a lot of places. Our local farm store sells blue grama grass seeds. And there are some new varieties that are really beautiful because they get this wonderful little seed head on them that turns this pretty soft yellow in the fall. So it's something to think about, especially if you don't have to remove a whole lot of bluegrass like I do from my yard to plant this. However, I'm working on it. I think I like this look. Okay, so then one that's very important to your landscape is improving your soil. If you don't know what kind of soil you have, and I'm not sure, Montrose probably has, I don't know what it has. It's probably got a different kind of soil. We have a lot of salt in our soil because we used to be part of an ocean here in the Grand Valley. So that's an important thing in our growing. I don't think you have as much salt up there in Montrose or at that altitude. So a good idea to get your soil tested. It costs I think $35. You can send you get a soil kit from the extension service, and they send it off to CSU, and they kind of tell you the amendments that your soil might need to be optimum for growing things. So for $35, I think it's pretty good use of your money. Then you want to assess what kind of drainage you have. A lot of plants need good drainage. If you have heavy clay soils like we do down in Fruta, you may want to add more organic matter than you might or ordinarily. And then I think the best soil amendment you can have is compost. You can add some coarser compost that will open the soil up, because if it's real dense and clay-like, it's hard for things to grow in that. So you just loosen it up so their roots can get air. And then I think you should work it at least a shovel deep when you first start. With my vegetable garden, I did 2 shovels deep. So it's probably 16 inches deep for my vegetable garden. And if you do it, you won't have to do it every year if you do it right once, and that's just get everything in there. And all you'll have to do then is to add some compost to the top and just work it in a little bit on the top after that. So it's probably best to use a well-composted plant-based organic matter. However, a lot of people do use manures. Some sheep manure they used to use here, horse manure. The only thing about that is that it has to be well composted, because if it's not, it'll compete with your plants for nitrogen. So when it's well composted, then the diseases are out of it, the weed seeds are killed. So you want to make sure, if you are using some kind of a manure compost, that it is well composted. And I'm down to the second from the last. Use mulches. I think 3 to 4 inches is good of probably even the rock. Here's my thought about the rock versus the wood. If you have a flower garden that you're going to be working in, adding things to, subtracting, doing the kinds of things you do with a perennial garden, I would use a wood mulch, because the rock is so unpleasant to try to work in. But if you have just a bunch of nice shrubs and trees, a rock mulch is fine. It basically does the same thing. When you dig down into the soil with a good rock mulch, it will be cooler because the rock creates that barrier from the sun. So I think it really helps to mulch, to conserve water. Some people kind of don't like the fact that bugs nestle in there. Spiders sometimes. We only have a couple of really bad spiders here in Western Slope, Colorado, and one's a black widow. The other one, there's kind of they call it a house spider, but it can bite you and raise a good welt, but that's all it does. And then, of course, they come in, they're not native to this area. They come in packaging from somewhere south, a brown recluse. We've had them here, but usually it's involved with something where they was shipped in here. Okay. You may need to refresh it each year, especially if it's a wood mulch. So this is just an example of a good way to use. This is the rock mulch. They've mixed it with other rocks and different sizes of gravel. It looks kind of like desert soil. And then this is a good wood mulch. We do have a hard time growing this plant. It's a hydrangea because it likes more acidic soil, but that's probably how your mulched garden should look. Last but not least, see this in red? Xeriscape does not mean no maintenance. A lot of people think that that's what it means, but it's not. Unfortunately, you have to work a little bit in it. These are they're obvious things, you know, find out what the best horticultural practice is, and that's where your master gardeners can help you to know what to do when in the garden. And you just water and weed it as needed. The more mulch you use, the less weeds. However, the rock mulch, it can get weeds after a couple of years because weeds blow in and dirt blows in. And so those weeds will germinate in the soil that's been collected in the rock mulch. And so that's just one thing to know about it. It's easy to spray them, you know, and there's even new practices that are not poison, you know, like a herbicide. There's a steam method you can spray that'll get annuals, and then some people advocate using agricultural vinegar, which in my mind is almost as dangerous, or maybe even more dangerous than the herbicides. So trees and shrubs, you need to remember to water them all year long, especially with this drought. It's just killing, especially evergreens everywhere. So you just really need to water, good deep watering once a month, even in the winter, and maybe a little more often if we get above 90 degrees like we did almost every day last summer. So that's a part, you just plan that in your irrigation. And of course, perennial plants divide and replace and deadhead. And those kids are just cute. At this age, they love helping. Later on, they don't want to. You have to force them. So that's what my future yard is going to look like. So, or something like that. Anyway, that's my slideshow. Does anyone have questions they'd like me to answer? I did all the talking. So thanks for having me.
I have a question.
Yeah.
My question has to do with, I've got way too much grass and I need to get rid of it and go to some of these. How are you getting rid of your grass?
Well, I wanted, you know, you can spray Roundup on it if you want to. That'll do it. And but I didn't want to do that. So I was moving, so I had all these boxes with cardboard, and you can get cardboard different places, liquor stores or wherever. I laid cardboard out and pinned it down during the winter, so that I started probably about October and left that cardboard on until now, April, and that killed the grass pretty well. And I didn't have to do much at all other than just put that cardboard down. And I'm working on a section of the yard at a time. Now there's several grass killers. They're all awful. I mean, I had one had some grass, that bluegrass is the worst too. I mean, it's just, I don't know how, do you have a huge amount of?
Oh yeah. And so over an acre, and I got to get rid of it, a lot of it. anyway. We used one of those things that we rented from Home Depot that digs up the sod, but that's a
Sod it.
lot of work.
Yeah, it is. Uh-huh.
So cardboard, huh? Okay.
Well, that would see, I don't have such a big yard as that. I wonder if you could till it. Thing is, they're saying tilling is not very good for the soil on a regular basis, but I wonder. I think if you had a great big area, Roundup might be the way to go because it doesn't supposedly doesn't stay in the soil. But is it all bluegrass or is it some other kind of grass?
Yeah, it's bluegrass. I tend not to use Roundup because I like the bees.
Uh-huh. I know. I don't. Well, the Roundup won't hurt the bees per se. It may kill things that they like to, get nectar from, but because it's an herbicide, not an insecticide. But I don't like to use it either, and that's why I went to cardboard. But if you've got an acre of it, that's a lot to try to pave in cardboard.
Well, just in little bits. We're doing a bit at a time and getting rid of it. So
that's how I'm doing it.
Trying to do it all at once.
That's how I'm doing it because I've got a half acre of grass, so I'm just taking a section at a time, and then what I'm going to do, and eventually the bluegrass will go away after I get the bluegrass knocked down, with the cardboard. I'm going to plant that blue grama grass where I don't have to. I'm either going to plant that or shrubs and flowers, so that I don't have to. Keep fighting that bluegrass.
Okay.
That's about as good as I can do.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have a question?
I've got another one if you want to.
Sure. Yeah.
With all this grass, we've already got a irrigation system set up for the grass.
Right.
So now, and it's irrigation water. It's not culinary water.
Yeah.
So are there valves and stuff like that you can put in to replace that are low pressure for bubbler systems, or you have to
Yes.
you have to go buy a different valve and stuff?
Probably the way I would do it would be you might have to buy a different valve because you kind of you don't want to have big spray on your shrubs if you're going to say put shrubs there. So you have to decide what you're going to grow there. That same riser that your sprinkler head is on can be switched over to be a bubbler. The thing you have to pay attention to is each zone will have a certain pressure. So, and they may all be the same pressure, but you don't want a low pressure type irrigation system, such as a drip system, to be on the same line with, say, your big maxi pods,
Right.
So you have to kind of zone them that way. But a good irrigation guy should be able to use your same pipes really, and just put different heads on for whatever you're changing your landscape to. It's a job. I'm having it done in my house too, and I had to talk to him about it, but he thinks he can get it done. We're gonna have the sprinklers where the lawn is, and then I'm going to probably use those higher volume drip bubblers in my perennial garden. And in the vegetable garden, I'm not sure. I may just flood irrigate it, which is what I have been doing. I've just watered it. So, because you don't want water on your vegetable leaves either. You don't want sprinkled. So, does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I struggled with it before, and I actually put a pressure reducer in the line, trying to get the pressure down because it kept blowing the bubbler heads.
Yes.
And I think I finally got it knocked down enough so it's working, but It took a while.
Yes, yeah. We have high pressure as well because we're at the bottom of a hill. The water flows down to us. I have enough pressure not to have to use a pump on my flowers. So if you can get that pressure taken care of, then you will have to have one if you use a drip system. You'll have to control that pressure. But good irrigation guy ought to be able to help with that.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm, mhm. Okay. Any other questions? Well, I kind of went over time. I hope I didn't keep anyone from something. Well, I've enjoyed speaking to you. I hope you gained something from it. So, um,
Thank you so much, Anne. It was a pleasure having you.
okay, yeah. Well, thank you for having me. So,